We spoke to 7 candidates today. We're going to hear from another 5 tomorrow, including Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Cory Booker. We invited every single Democratic candidate, in fact, all the candidates, but the only one of the Democratic candidates polling in the top 3 who took us up on the offer was Senator Bernie Sanders. Obviously, he, Vice President Joe Biden, Senator Elizabeth Warren recently participated in a different climate town hall, but today was a great opportunity to hear more from a leading Democratic contender. Describe to me when and how you came to realize the acuity, the seriousness, the urgency of this problem.
Sometimes as human beings, we have a hard time imagining the future. You know, we kind of look at next year and the year after that is kind of like it was last year. But if the scientists are right, and I believe that they are, next year is not going to be like last year. And 5 years from now is not going to be like 5 years before. We are facing an unprecedented global crisis. It disturbs me very, very much that we have a president who believes that climate change is a hoax. And what disturbs me about it is that that attitude on his part, on the part of the fossil fuel industry, not only threatens the well-being of our country, it threatens the well-being of the entire world. Unlike Trump, I do believe in science. And what I believe is if we do not act in an incredibly aggressive way in moving away from fossil fuels to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, and what makes this issue even harder and more complicated, it's not just an American issue, it is a global issue. We got to lead the world. But if we do not do that, the planet that you will be inheriting and your kids and your grandchildren will be inheriting will be increasingly uninhabitable and unhealthy. And we have a moral responsibility to make sure that that does not happen. And as president, this will be a major top priority for me. These type of extreme weather disturbances hitting us more and more frequently with greater intensity. Think about people all over the world driven from their homes because they can't grow crops anymore. They can't find drinking water. They're going to go elsewhere. And what the CIA and the Department of Defense tells us is this creates a major international national security issue when large numbers of people are migrating and fighting for land. So here is the point. It seems to me you can approach this problem in one of 3 ways. You could do what Trump does, which is basically irresponsible and pathetic, and that is to, and that's, I'm being kind to him. All right? Or, Chris, you can do what some of my colleagues do and say, look, of course climate change is real, but let's not overdo it. You know, we have a limited amount of money to spend here, and we got to be modest, and we got to be realistic about it. And a lot of folks are saying that. Maybe, you know, I don't know what to tell you. I happen to believe in what the scientists are telling us, and that means that if we're going to save the planet, we have to be extremely bold. At the end of the day, you have executives in the fossil fuel industry and the oil companies, coal companies, gas companies. Their scientists know exactly what they're doing. In fact, as you know, there's strong evidence that ExxonMobil, their scientists were telling them, what, for decades, that the product that they are producing is destroying the planet. So how do you deal with executives who are in companies making billions of dollars a year in profit, and the product that they are producing, happens to be destroying the planet? You got that? You got to deal with that. And we not only are going to have to tell them that they cannot destroy the planet for their short-term profits, politically, we're going to have to stand up to them. And essentially what my campaign is about, whether it's the fossil fuel industry or the healthcare industry, which made $100 billion in profits last year, or the private prison industry, which makes money by throwing Americans into jail, we have got to stand up to the greed and corruption. I know those are strong words, make some of you uncomfortable, all right? I don't know how much they teach about that here in Georgetown. What we have got to do, and as President of the United States, this is what I would do. I would make an appeal to the rest of the world and say, you know what? We are now spending as a planet over $1.5 trillion a year on weapons of destruction designed to kill each other. And maybe the horror of what climate change could do to countries all over the world might just, under strong American leadership, bring these countries together in a way that says, you know what, instead of spending $1.5 trillion on weapons of destruction, why don't we pool our resources and fight our common enemy, which is climate change?
There's a real devil's in the detail situation where you have, say, I think a $50 billion climate resiliency fund. There's a crash program to improve storage, right? All of these are enormous pools of money. And again, I think you could argue they're in scale to the problem. But you're talking about administering this at a level that hasn't been done since World War II. It would be an enormous change to the capacity of the government.
Chris, what you are telling me is that this is tough.
Yes.
I acknowledge that. Okay? But what is the alternative? All right? I'm told that it is expensive. And I'm told by Chris, correctly so, this is administratively very, very difficult. He's right. But you tell me what the alternative is if we do not act boldly and aggressively. All right, not only are we fighting for your kids and your grandchildren to be living in a planet that is healthy and habitable, all right, but I should also tell you that this plan, Chris, in the middle of that transition, creates up to 20 million good-paying jobs. We could retrofit buildings to cut the utilization of energy by 50% or more. It takes a lot of workers to do that. If we are going to be aggressive in moving to sustainable energy, wind and solar, I want those panels and other technologies to be done here in the United States of America. Massive amounts of work that have to be done. If we're talking about the electrification of our transportation system, that means creating a new rail system in America. We are already way behind Europe and Japan in that regard. That takes an enormous amount of work, building those locomotives and those trains, especially under Trump. He has used executive orders very frequently and very aggressively, and I certainly would do that in terms of climate change. I work with Alexandria Cortez-Ocasio in introducing legislation which would declare climate change a national emergency.
And you would do that unilaterally and from the executive?
Well, I think it is a national emergency, and I would use all of the executive powers that we have.
There's a mention in the plan when you talk about sort of holding fossil fuel companies accountable. Yep. We know that there are both private plaintiffs and states that are suing in a model that's not dissimilar from the tobacco lawsuits, which of course created billions of dollars of funds in public health. Would you use the Department of Justice for litigation against fossil fuel companies?
Duh. Of course I would. What do you do to people who lied in a very bold-faced way, lied to the American people, lied to the media? How do you hold them accountable? How do you hold fossil fuel executives who knew that they were destroying the planet but kept on doing it? We will hold them accountable. What do you do if executives knew that the product they were producing was destroying the planet and they continue to do it? Do you think that that might be subject to criminal charges?
I don't know.
Oh!
I'm not running for president.
Well, I think it's something we should look at. The guys who work on oil rigs, people who work in coal mines, people who work in the fossil fuel industry, they are not my enemy. They are my friends. And we are not going to do what others have done and turn our backs on those people. And as you know, if you're familiar with the proposal that I've introduced, we have allocated tens of billions of dollars for what we call a just transition. And so what we're saying to those workers, look, we don't hold you responsible for causing climate change, all right? But we have got to move away from fossil fuel. And what we build into our proposal is 5 years. 5 years of full pay, of health care, of job training, of education.
Right now, obviously, the amount of refugees we take in is at historic lows in terms of the recent history. And there's a lot of things that can be done in the executive in terms of asylum categories. Would you favor expanding the asylum categories, which are enumerated, right, to include a category for people that are specifically climate, pushed out by climate?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely something that we have to look at, and I think I would be positively disposed to that. But it has to exist all over the world. What she raised is, I mean, it's not just people in Latin America who would gravitate to the United States.
Sure.
It is people all over the world. And, you know, it means that we have to deal with the crises in these countries right now so that people can possibly stay there. And we have to welcome people all over the world. I mean, we're talking about God knows how many millions and millions and millions of people who are going to be dispossessed as a result of climate change. It's a huge issue.
Much more tonight on this special edition of All In. I'll talk to some of these Georgetown students about who impressed them today and who didn't, plus our own report on the cover-up in the fossil fuel industry. And we'll hear from Al Gore about his decades-long fight to move the needle on climate. All that is coming up when we come back.